You've noticed it, haven't you? The silence, the empty weekends, the messages that never come, the invitations that stopped arriving, and somewhere deep inside, there's a voice asking if something is wrong with you. Let me tell you something that will change how you see everything. Nothing is wrong with you. Everything is finally going right, because what you're experiencing isn't rejection, it's selection. The world is sorting itself, and you're being moved to a different category. A category most people will never reach because they lack the courage to stand in the space you're occupying right now. That space is called strategic solitude, and it's where every person who has ever held real power has spent significant time. Not because they were abandoned, but because they were evolving beyond the reach of ordinary minds. Machiavelli understood this better than almost anyone in history. He didn't write The Prince from a position of comfort and popularity. He wrote it in exile, stripped of his position, isolated from the political world he once navigated. And it was precisely that isolation that gave him the clarity to see what others couldn't. The mechanisms of power, the psychology of control, the reality that the world doesn't reward the moral, it rewards the strategic. And here you are, living your own version of that exile. Maybe you didn't choose it. Maybe people drifted away. Maybe you started saying no to things that once defined your social life. Maybe you stopped pretending to care about conversations that felt hollow. Whatever the reason, you're here now, alone, and that's when the real game begins. Because here's what nobody tells you about being alone. It's not a deficit. It's an advantage. Every moment you spend without the noise of other people's agendas is a moment you can spend sharpening your own strategy. Every hour not wasted on maintaining shallow relationships is an hour you can invest in building something that actually matters. Every day you wake up without having to perform for an audience is a day you can work on the most important project you'll ever undertake: yourself. Most people are terrified of being alone because being alone forces them to confront who they actually are. And for most people, that's a horror show. They discover that without external validation, they have no sense of self. Without constant stimulation, they have no idea what they actually want. Without the mirror of other people's reactions, they don't know how to behave. So they run back to the crowd, back to the noise, back to the comfortable prison of social obligation. But you're still here. You're still standing in this uncomfortable space. And that tells me something about you. It tells me you have the raw material of someone who can actually win at this game called life. Not the sanitized version of winning that society sells you, where everyone gets a participation trophy and feelings matter more than results. I'm talking about real winning, the kind where you build something that can't be taken from you, where you develop a mind that can't be manipulated, where you become someone who moves pieces on the board instead of being a piece that gets moved. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But there's a deeper truth hidden in that statement. Before you can be either feared or loved, you must first become someone. Not the collection of other people's expectations that most people mistake for identity. Not the performance you put on to gain approval, but an actual coherent self with clear objectives, defined boundaries, and the strategic capacity to achieve what you set out to do. And that self is only built in solitude. Because in solitude, there's nowhere to hide. You can't distract yourself with drama. You can't avoid your own thoughts by drowning them in social noise. You can't pretend to be someone you're not because there's no audience to perform for. You're forced to sit with yourself, to examine your own motivations, to question your own beliefs, to test your own resolve. This is brutal. Most people can't handle even a weekend of this. They immediately reach for their phone, scroll through social media, binge watch something, anything to avoid the confrontation with their own mind. But that avoidance comes at a cost. Every time you run from yourself, you reinforce the pattern. You train yourself to need external input. You become dependent on the validation of others. You give away your power piece by piece until you have none left. And then you wonder why your life feels out of control, why you can't make decisions without consulting everyone around you, why you feel anxious when you're not getting constant feedback, why you change your behavior based on who's in the room. It's because you never built a foundation. You never spent time alone long enough to construct a self that can stand independent of external circumstances. Think about the most powerful people you know, not the ones who are loud and popular. I'm talking about the ones who actually get things done, the ones who make decisions that stick, the ones who seem unmoved by social pressure, the The ones who can sit in a room full of people disagreeing with them and not flinch. What do they all have in common? They're comfortable being alone. They don't need the crowd's approval. They've spent enough time with themselves to know exactly who they are and what they want. This is what Machiavelli meant when he talked about Virtu. It's often translated as virtue, but that's misleading. It's closer to strength, capability, the quality of being effective in the world. And you cannot develop Virtu in a crowd. You cannot develop it by consensus. You cannot develop it by trying to please everyone. You develop it by making hard decisions in isolation, by choosing your path even when everyone else thinks you're wrong, by building your strategy in silence and revealing it only when it's already in motion. Every great military commander understood this. Every successful entrepreneur knows this. Every person who has ever built something significant has spent significant time alone, working while others were socializing, planning while others were playing, developing skills while others were seeking comfort. They weren't antisocial, they weren't broken, they were strategic. They understood that attention is finite and every moment spent on social obligation is a moment not spent on strategic advancement. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds cold. This sounds like I'm telling you to abandon all human connection and become some kind of isolated calculating machine. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that there's a difference between connection and dependency. There's a difference between choosing to spend time with people and needing to spend time with people. There's a difference between having relationships and being defined by relationships. Most people have the second kind. They're in relationships not because they choose them, but because they're afraid of the alternative. They maintain friendships not because they're valuable, but because the absence of friends feels like failure. They seek out social situations not because they enjoy them, but because being alone triggers anxiety. This is dependency. And dependency is weakness. Machiavelli was very clear about this. A prince must not depend on fortune or the goodwill of others. He must build his power on foundations he controls, and the same applies to you. If your sense of self-worth depends on how many people like you, you're vulnerable. If your happiness depends on constant social validation, you can be controlled. If your decisions are influenced by fear of what others think, you're not free. True power comes from self-sufficiency, not in the sense that you never interact with others, but in the sense that you could survive and thrive without them. When you reach that point, something magical happens. You stop being needy. And when you stop being needy, you become magnetic, because people can smell desperation. They can sense when someone needs them, and it repels them. But when you genuinely don't need anyone, when you're complete in yourself, that's when people want to be around you. This is the paradox of social power. The less you need people, the more they need you. The less you seek approval, the more respect you command. The more comfortable you are alone, the more others want your company. But you can't fake this. You can't pretend to be self-sufficient while secretly desperate for validation. People will see through it. You have to actually do the work. You have to actually spend time alone. You have to actually build a self that doesn't collapse in the absence of others. And that's what's happening to you right now. Whether you chose it or not, you're in the perfect environment to build that self. You have time. You have space. You have silence. These are resources. Most people waste them by filling them with distraction. But you have the opportunity to use them strategically, to read, to think, to plan, to develop skills, to clarify your vision, to build the foundation of a life that's actually yours. Because let's be honest about something. How much of your life up until now has actually been yours? How many of your goals were adopted from what you thought you should want? How many of your beliefs were inherited without examination? How many of your behaviors were designed to fit in rather than to express who you actually are? If you're honest, probably most of them. Most people live their entire lives on autopilot, following scripts written by others, pursuing goals that were never theirs, maintaining relationships out of obligation rather than choice. And then they wonder why they feel empty. Why success doesn't feel satisfying. Why achieving what they thought they wanted doesn't bring happiness. It's because none of it was real. It was all performance, and performance is exhausting. It requires constant energy to maintain. It requires you to monitor your behavior constantly. It requires you to suppress your actual thoughts and feelings, and eventually it breaks you. Solitude is where you stop performing, where you drop the mask, where you figure out what you actually think as opposed to what you're supposed to think. And this is dangerous. Dangerous because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. Once you understand how much of your life was performance, you can't go back to performing unconsciously. Once you recognize which relationships were real and which were transactional, you can't pretend anymore. This is why people drift away when you start spending time alone, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're changing. You're becoming more authentic, more boundaried, more selective, and that makes people uncomfortable, especially people who benefited from your inauthenticity, the people who liked you because you always said yes, the people who kept you around because you made them feel better about themselves, the people who enjoyed your company because you never challenged them. When you start developing a real self, when you start having actual opinions, when you start saying no to things that don't serve you, these people disappear. And that's good, that's the trash taking itself out, because those weren't real relationships. They were arrangements of convenience, and you maintaining them was costing you more than you realized. It was costing you energy. It was costing you time. It was costing you the opportunity to build something real. Machiavelli wrote extensively about alliances, about when to form them and when to break them, about how to evaluate whether a relationship serves your interests or undermines them. And one of his key insights was that loyalty is rare. Most people are loyal to their own interests, not to you. They'll stay as long as you're useful and leave the moment you're not. Understanding this doesn't make you cynical. It makes you realistic. And realism is the foundation of effective strategy. So when you look at your life and see who's left, don't mourn the ones who disappeared. Analyze them. Ask yourself what you were getting from those relationships. Ask yourself what they were getting from you. Ask yourself if the exchange was balanced or if you were giving far more than you received. In most cases, you'll find it was unbalanced. You were the one listening to their problems. You were the one making accommodations. You were the one sacrificing your preferences to maintain peace. And now that you've stopped doing that, now that you've started prioritizing your own development, they're gone. Not because you're a bad person. Not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped being useful to them. And that reveals what the relationship actually was. It was transactional. They were there for what you provided, not for who you are. And recognizing this is liberating, because it means you didn't lose anything real. You just stopped wasting resources on something that was never going to give you a return. This is strategic thinking. This is how you evaluate everything in your life. Not through the lens of emotion, but through the lens of effectiveness. Does this relationship make me stronger or weaker? Does this activity move me toward my goals or distract me from them? Does this belief serve me or limit me? These are the questions you can only ask in solitude, because in the noise of social life, you're too busy reacting to stop and evaluate. You're too busy maintaining appearances to examine whether those appearances serve you. But alone, you have the space to think, to really think. Not the shallow thinking you do while scrolling through your phone. Not the reactive thinking you do in conversation, but deep, strategic thinking about who you are, what you want, and how you're going to get it. This is where plans are made. This is where strategies are developed. This is where you become dangerous. And I use that word intentionally, dangerous, not in the sense of being violent or harmful, but in the sense of being capable, being formidable. Being someone who cannot be easily dismissed or manipulated or controlled. Most people are harmless because they're predictable. You know exactly how they'll react because they always react the same way. They're driven by the same fears, the same needs, the same desire for approval, and that makes them easy to manage. But someone who has spent time alone, who has developed a strong sense of self, who doesn't need external validation, who has clear goals and the discipline to pursue them, that person is unpredictable. That person can't be controlled through the usual means. You can't manipulate them with guilt because they don't feel guilty for prioritizing themselves. You can't control them with social pressure because they don't care what the crowd thinks. You can't distract them with drama because they're focused on their objectives. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about the qualities a prince must have. Not kindness, not fairness, not popularity, but the capacity to act decisively in pursuit of clear goals regardless of how others react. And that capacity is built in solitude, because in solitude, you learn to trust your own judgment. You learn to make decisions without consulting everyone around you. You learn to tolerate the discomfort of going against the grain. Most people never develop this. They spend their entire lives seeking consensus, trying to make everyone happy, avoiding conflict at all costs, and they end up weak. They end up being pushed around by anyone with a stronger will. They end up living lives designed by others because they never took the time to design their own. And then they wonder why they feel powerless, why they feel like life is happening to them rather than being created by them. You have the opportunity to avoid that fate. You have the opportunity to use this period of solitude to build something most people never build. A self that can't be shaken, a vision that can't be diluted, a strategy that can't be derailed by the opinions of people who don't matter. But it requires you to embrace this discomfort. It requires you to stop seeing alone time as something to be filled or fixed. It requires you to recognize it for what it is, an investment. Every hour you spend alone developing yourself is an hour invested in your future power. Every book you read increases your strategic understanding. Every skill you develop increases your capability. Every hour you spend thinking through your goals clarifies your direction. This is compound interest for your life. It doesn't pay off immediately. But over time, it creates an advantage so significant that others can't catch up. Think about it this way. While others are spending their evenings maintaining shallow friendships, you're reading about psychology, about strategy, about power dynamics. While others are spending their weekends recovering from social obligations, you're working on projects that actually matter. While others are spending their energy performing for an audience, you're building in silence. Who do you think will be in a stronger position a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? The answer is obvious, but it requires patience. It requires the ability to delay gratification. It requires you to tolerate the discomfort of being alone now in exchange for the advantage of being powerful later. And most people can't do this. They need immediate comfort. They need immediate validation. They need to feel good right now, so they sacrifice their future for their present. They choose the temporary relief of social connection over the long-term benefit of strategic development. You're different. Or at least you have the potential to be different. You're in this uncomfortable space and you haven't run away yet. That tells me something. It tells me you have the capacity for delayed gratification, the capacity to tolerate discomfort in pursuit of a larger goal, the capacity to think strategically rather than emotionally. These are rare qualities. And they're the qualities that separate those who win from those who merely survive. Machiavelli studied history extensively. He looked at the rise and fall of empires, the success and failure of leaders, the patterns that determined who held power and who lost it. And one pattern appeared again and again. Those who won were those who could stand alone, those who could make unpopular decisions, those who could pursue their strategy even when everyone around them thought they were wrong. They had conviction. They had clarity. They had the strength to be isolated if necessary. And that strength came from knowing themselves, from having spent time in solitude figuring out what they actually valued, from having built a foundation that didn't depend on the approval of others. This is what you're building right now. Whether you realize it or not, every day you spend alone is making you stronger. Every day you resist the temptation to run back to comfort is increasing your capacity. Every day you choose to work on yourself instead of seeking distraction is moving you closer to the person you need to become. But you have to be intentional about it. You can't just passively experience solitude and expect transformation. You have to actively use it. You have to treat it as training, as preparation, as the forge where you're being shaped into something harder, sharper, more effective. And that means having structure, having goals, having daily practices that move you forward. Read every day. Not fiction for escape, but material that increases your understanding. Psychology, strategy, history, philosophy, biographies of powerful people. Material that teaches you how the world actually works, not how you wish it worked. Every book is a conversation with someone who figured something out. Someone who learned lessons you don't have to learn the hard way. Someone who can compress years of experience into hours of reading. Write every day. Not for an audience, but for clarity. Write about what you're thinking, what you're learning, what you're planning. Writing forces you to organize your thoughts. It reveals contradictions in your thinking. It clarifies what you actually believe versus what you think you should believe. It's thinking on paper. And the more you do it, the clearer your mind becomes. Build something every day. A skill, a project, a business. Something tangible that didn't exist before you worked on it. Something that proves to yourself that you're capable of creation, not just consumption. Most people spend their lives consuming content, consuming entertainment, consuming other people's ideas. But creation is where power lives. because when you can build things, you're no longer dependent on what others build. You're no longer at the mercy of systems you don't control. Train your body every day, not for appearance but for discipline. Physical training teaches you that discomfort is temporary, that you can push through resistance, that you're capable of more than you think, and it builds the physical energy you need to execute on your plans. A weak body creates a weak mind. A strong body supports a strong mind. Machiavelli wrote about this too. A prince must keep his body in training so he's ready for war. And life is war, it's competition, it's conflict. And you need to be physically capable of handling it. These practices, done consistently in solitude, transform you. They turn alone time from something you endure into something you leverage. They make you dangerous in the best possible way. Dangerous because you're capable, because you're knowledgeable, because you're disciplined, because you're clear on what you want and skilled at getting it. And when you emerge from this period of solitude, you emerge as someone completely different from who you were when you entered. You emerge as someone who doesn't need permission, who doesn't seek approval, who doesn't break under pressure, who doesn't compromise on things that matter, who doesn't get distracted by drama, who doesn't waste time on people who don't add value, who doesn't apologize for prioritizing their own goals. This is the person you're becoming, and this person wins, not because they're lucky, not because they're privileged, not because the world is fair, but because they're strategic, because they understand how power works, because they spent time alone building capacity while others were seeking comfort, because they made sacrifices others weren't willing to make, because they had the courage to be alone when being alone was the hardest thing they could do. And here's the final truth. Once you've built this, once you've become this person, you'll never be truly alone again. Not because you'll suddenly be surrounded by people, though you might be, but because you'll be complete in yourself. You won't need others to feel whole. You won't need validation to know your worth. You won't need constant company to avoid your own thoughts. You'll be self-sufficient, self-contained, self-directed, and from that position of strength you can choose connection, not out of need but out of preference. Not because you're afraid to be alone, but because you genuinely enjoy certain people's company. Not because you need them to complete you, but because they add something valuable to an already complete life. This is the difference between connection and dependency. And it's a difference most people never understand because they never spend enough time alone to build the foundation. You're building that foundation right now. Every day you wake up alone is another day of construction. Every evening you spend in silence is another brick laid. Every weekend without plans is another opportunity to strengthen the structure. And eventually you'll have built something unshakable, something that can't be torn down by rejection, something that can't be diminished by criticism, something that can't be controlled by manipulation. You'll have built a self, a real self. Not the performance, not the mask, not the collection of other people's expectations, but an actual coherent identity with clear values, defined goals, and the strategic capacity to achieve them. And once you have that, everything changes. You move through the world differently, you make decisions differently, you relate to others differently, you see opportunities others miss, you avoid traps others fall into. You win games others don't even know they're playing. This is what Machiavelli understood. This is what every person who has ever held real power understood. Solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's not isolation, it's incubation. It's not loneliness, it's strategic advantage. And if you're experiencing it right now, if you're in that uncomfortable space where no one is reaching out and nothing is happening and you're forced to sit with yourself, congratulations. You're exactly where you need to be. Don't waste it. Don't fill it with distraction. Don't run back to comfort. Don't seek out shallow connection just to avoid the discomfort. Stay here, do the work, build the foundation, develop the skills. Clarify the vision, strengthen the discipline, because this is your opportunity. This is your moment. This is when you become someone who wins. And when you emerge, when you finally step back into the world with everything you've built in silence, people will notice. They won't understand what changed. They won't be able to point to a specific difference, but they'll feel it. They'll sense that you're operating on a different level, that you see things they don't see, that you're playing a game they don't understand. And they'll either respect you or fear you or both, but what they won't do is ignore you, because you'll have become someone who can't be ignored, someone who commands attention without demanding it, someone who influences without trying, someone who wins without fighting. This is the power of strategic solitude. This is what being alone actually means. It means you're winning, you just don't see the scoreboard yet.